Have you ever wondered why the Bible, so well known for its messages of love and redemption, also contains stories of violence, suffering, and morally challenging choices? Do these accounts reflect divine will or the human context in which they were written? What can these darker narratives teach us about faith, humanity, and our relationship with God? Welcome. Here, we explore the path of faith and seek to understand the mysteries God has left us. My name is Light, or as many call me, L. Today, we will walk together on yet another journey of spiritual discovery. In today's episode, we will delve into some of the Bible's most challenging passages, those often avoided for seeming contradictory to Jesus' message of peace and love. We will examine stories of human sacrifice, extreme famine, and even episodes of violence attributed to divine will. What is the meaning behind these stories? And what do they reveal about the nature of God and humanity? Prepare yourself for a deep analysis that promises to change the way you view the Scriptures. Whether you are a Bible scholar or someone seeking to understand its complexities, stay with us until the end. Together, we will reflect on the limits of interpretation, the impact of historical context, and the timeless lessons hidden within the pages of the most influential book in history. The Bible is globally recognized as a collection of sacred texts that guide the moral and spiritual conduct of billions of people. It is often associated with Jesus' teachings, such as love for one's neighbor, compassion, and charity. However, its content goes far beyond messages of peace. It includes complex stories full of symbolism and, at times, frightening and controversial episodes. Many of these passages are seldom explored or intentionally left out of traditional interpretations. One intriguing aspect is the contrast between the lessons of Jesus in the New Testament and the accounts in the Old Testament. It's like comparing two sides of a coin. What appears to be opposite is actually part of the same divine purpose. We just need to carefully flip the coin to understand. While one preaches universal love, the other presents rules and narratives reflecting the harshness of ancient times. Many of these passages were written in vastly different cultural and historical contexts, which, for some, justifies the darker accounts. However, this justification does not lessen the impact these texts have when analyzed from a modern perspective. The Bible's darker stories reveal a reality not always taught in Sunday schools or sermons. These passages address themes such as slavery, incest, human sacrifice, and genocide. They lead us to question the central message of the sacred book and whether these accounts should be interpreted literally or as metaphors. Many scholars argue that these narratives reflect not only divine will but also the customs of the time in which they were written. This contrast between light and darkness in the biblical text can confuse readers, especially those seeking a singular, unquestionable moral guide in the Bible. I like to think of it as a mirror. The light reflects what we aspire to be, but the darkness reflects what we must confront within ourselves. It is important to remember that the Scriptures were written by many hands over centuries, in different languages, and in varied contexts. As a result, issues of translation, interpretation, and even omissions arise. What we read today may not be the exact reflection of what was originally recorded. Nevertheless, these passages offer us a broader and deeper view of what it means to be human and humanity's relationship with the divine. They show that the Bible is not merely a rulebook, but also a portrait of the struggle for survival, faith, and understanding of the universe. Perhaps it is this very duality that makes it such a fascinating and timeless work. Next, we will explore some of the Bible's most impactful and controversial passages, analyzing their meaning and what they reveal about faith and morality. In the book of Exodus, chapter 21, we find clear rules about the buying and selling of slaves. This practice, now morally condemned, was accepted as normal in biblical times. A specific passage addresses how slaves should be treated, including the punishment for masters who harmed their servants. If the slave died immediately after being beaten, the master would be punished. However, if the slave survived a few days, no punishment would be applied. This reflects a worldview where a slave's life was valued as property. Historically, this passage was used to justify modern slavery, especially during the colonial period when those in positions of power claimed to follow Scripture to validate inhumane practices. It's striking how, throughout history, the Bible has been used to justify the unjustifiable. This only reinforces the importance of interpreting with heart and conscience, not just with rules and dogmas. This distorted use highlights the dangers of literal interpretation of the Bible, especially when its historical context is disregarded. Does it reflect divine will or humanity's adaptation to the social realities of the time? Slavery, as portrayed in the Bible, is not merely a question of morality but also of theological purpose. Some interpretations suggest that these rules were included to regulate an existing practice, limiting abuses and bringing some sense of justice to society. However, even these moderate interpretations leave many uncomfortable, as they still depict a God who tolerates slavery. To critics, this seems to contradict the image of a God of love and justice. Scholars suggest that, rather than accepting slavery as divinely approved, we should understand that the Bible reflects the customs and values of its human authors. Divine inspiration, in this case, may have been limited by the cultural understanding of the time. This raises an essential question. To what extent should we interpret the Bible literally? Do all passages carry the same moral and spiritual authority? The stories of slavery in the Bible remain a topic of debate, especially in societies still grappling with the historical consequences of this system. They challenge us to reevaluate our understanding of the Scriptures and seek deeper answers to the moral dilemmas that arise. Perhaps, by confronting these difficult passages, we can find lessons that go beyond the written words, guiding us to a more compassionate and inclusive understanding of the divine message. In the book of Judges, chapter 11, we read the story of Jephthah, a judge of Israel who made a rash vow to God. He promised to offer as a sacrifice the first being that came out of his house to greet him if he was victorious in battle. After his victory, it was his own daughter who came out to meet him. The Bible narrates that Jephthah fulfilled his promise, sacrificing her as an offering to God. This story, though less well known, is one of the most disturbing in the Old Testament. This episode raises profound moral and theological questions. Why would God allow Jephthah to fulfill such a promise? Human sacrifice, considered an abomination in other parts of the Bible, seems to be tolerated here. Some argue that the story was included as a warning against rash vows, while others believe it reflects an archaic view of extreme devotion. Either way, it is a narrative that challenges our understanding of divine justice. Jephthah's story also reminds us of the historical context in which it was written. Understanding the context is like adjusting a camera lens. Without it, everything remains blurry. Often, the clarity lies in what seems hidden. At that time, human sacrifice was a common practice in many cultures, and the narrative may reflect this external influence. However, the inclusion of such an account in the Bible suggests that even followers of God were not exempt from making grave mistakes. The message may not be about God's will but about the dangers of human ignorance and fanaticism. Jephthah is a tragic figure, representing both courage and human folly. He was a leader who trusted God but also fell victim to his own promise. His story reminds us that blind faith, without discernment, can lead to terrible consequences. It invites us to reflect on how to balance devotion and wisdom in our own spiritual practice. The story of Jephthah is just one of many passages that challenge us to look beyond the surface and question the underlying messages of the Bible. It forces us to confront the contradictions of faith and find deeper meaning in the stories that have been passed down to us. What we can learn from Jephthah is that true devotion does not lie in extreme sacrifices but in understanding and living in accordance with God's true will. In the second book of Kings, chapter 2, we find an intriguing story about Elisha, a prophet of God, and a group of children who mocked his appearance. I must admit, this is one of those stories that makes you scratch your head and ask, what's going on here? But it's precisely in these passages that we find deeper lessons about respect and responsibility. When Elisha heard the mocking, he cursed the youths in the name of the Lord. Immediately, 2 bears came out of the forest and killed 42 children. This narrative, frightening and controversial, is often used as a lesson on respect for divine authority, but it also raises questions about the proportionality of the punishment applied. Many scholars suggest that there may have been a translation error in the term children, which could be understood as youths or servants. This interpretation attempts to soften the account, arguing that the episode was not an attack on innocent children but a divine response against a group that threatened Elisha or mocked his prophetic mission. Even so, the violence of the episode remains disturbing and morally difficult to justify. For some interpreters, the story reflects the importance of respect for God's representatives. Elisha, as a prophet, held a sacred position, and any disrespect toward him was considered a direct affront to God. However, this perspective raises questions about divine mercy and what truly constitutes justice. Would God really tolerate the death of so many people for something seemingly trivial like mockery? Others argue that this story is symbolic, representing God's victory over idolatry or those who oppose the faith. The bears could be a metaphor for the natural consequences of straying from God's paths. This approach seeks to extract a more spiritual lesson from the text rather than focusing on the violent act described. However, even this interpretation does not eliminate the discomfort the narrative generates. Regardless of the interpretation, the story of Elisha and the bears forces us to reflect on the balance between justice and mercy. Are we reading the story too literally? Or was it written to make us ponder the seriousness of our commitment to God? The text is a challenge for both scholars and believers, showing that not all passages in the Bible are easy to understand. This narrative teaches us that the Bible is a book of immense complexity, where not everything is black and white. It demands careful analysis, taking into account the historical, cultural, and spiritual context of each account. What seems like severe punishment may hide a deeper lesson about the responsibilities of faith and the consequences of our actions. In the second book of Kings, chapter 6, we encounter one of the Bible's darkest stories, describing the siege of Samaria by the king of Syria. The city was gripped by devastating famine, driving its inhabitants to desperate acts. Among the accounts, we find the story of two women who made a pact to survive. They would sacrifice their own children, one at a time, for food. After consuming the child of one woman, the other refused to fulfill her part of the agreement, sparking a dispute that reached the king of Israel. This story is a brutal depiction of human despair in times of extreme adversity. While it may seem shocking and implausible to us today, such situations have been documented throughout history in moments of war and extreme famine. The Bible does not spare its readers from reality, revealing the devastating impact of the human condition without divine intervention. God's silence in this episode also challenges our understanding of faith. The narrative prompts us to ask why God would allow his people to endure such calamity. Some interpretations suggest that the famine was divine punishment for collective sins, while others see the story as a reflection of the natural consequences of turning away from God. However, these explanations do not lessen the horror we feel upon reading this passage. How can we reconcile human suffering with belief in a loving God? This account also illustrates the complexity of the Bible as a historical and spiritual text. It shows that faith alone does not protect believers from facing the horrors of the world. At the same time, it reminds us that faith can be a source of strength to endure such challenges. The story of the siege of Samaria serves as a grim reminder that the Bible is not just a book of comfort but also one of brutal realism. By including this narrative, the scriptures seem to challenge us to reflect on human choices in extreme situations. Is suffering always a reflection of sin? Or is it a test of character and faith? These questions remain relevant today, especially in a world where hunger and injustice are still realities for many. The story calls us to look inward and question how we would react in similar situations. Would our faith be strong enough to guide us, or would we succumb to despair? It is a passage that not only shocks but also provokes deep introspection about the limits of human morality. The story of Noah's Ark, narrated in Genesis, is one of the Bible's most well-known accounts, often romanticized as a story of salvation. However, upon closer examination, it reveals itself as an episode of mass destruction. God decides to exterminate nearly all life on earth, sparing only Noah, his family, and a pair of each animal species. This decision was made as a punishment for humanity's widespread sin. Though presented as an act of divine justice, the global destruction raises troubling questions. Why would God, being all-powerful, choose such a drastic solution to address sin? Could there not have been another way to correct humanity's wrongs without nearly wiping them out? These questions make this story one of the most controversial episodes in the scriptures. Another point of debate is the issue of reproduction after the flood. Only one pair of each animal species was saved, implying that all current biological diversity originated from these initial pairs. Similarly, all humans would be descendants of Noah and his children, raising questions about incest and the scientific plausibility of this account. For many, these inconsistencies suggest the story should be interpreted as a metaphor rather than a literal account. Noah is often portrayed as an example of faith and obedience. He followed God's instructions without question, building the ark and protecting his family. However, his story also illustrates human frailty. After the flood, Noah faced difficulties and made mistakes, showing that even the most faithful are not immune to failure. This reminds us that the Bible does not exalt perfection but perseverance and repentance. The story of the flood is simultaneously a narrative of destruction and renewal. It invites us to reflect on the cost of sin and God's mercy, which always offers a chance for a new beginning. Yet, it also forces us to confront the more difficult aspects of divine justice and the complexity of God's decisions. Noah teaches us that faith is not an easy path. It is a commitment that demands sacrifice, trust, and above all, the acceptance that we will not always understand God's plans. Still, it remains a powerful symbol of hope, showing that even amidst destruction, God offers the possibility of redemption. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 25 and 26, Jesus makes a statement that, at first glance, seems to contradict his message of love and unity. He declares that those who wish to follow him must hate their parents, siblings, spouses, and even their own lives. This passage, unsettling to many, has been the subject of theological and historical debates for centuries. How can this seemingly extreme demand be reconciled with the central teaching of love for others that permeates the Gospels? To understand this passage, it is necessary to contextualize it. Many scholars believe Jesus used hyperbole, a form of rhetorical exaggeration common in Jewish culture, to emphasize the importance of putting God above all else. In this sense, hate would not be literal but indicate that commitment to God must take priority over any earthly bond. This does not diminish the importance of family but reinforces the idea that faith demands absolute dedication and sacrifice. Another interpretation suggests that Jesus was preparing his followers for the persecution and challenges they would face by choosing to follow him. During the first century, embracing Christianity often meant breaking with family and cultural traditions, which could be perceived as hatred by those who did not understand this decision. Thus, the passage can be read as a warning about the cost of discipleship rather than a literal command. Even so, the choice of the word hate generates discomfort, especially when compared to other passages where Jesus preaches forgiveness, reconciliation, and unconditional love. This raises questions about possible translation errors or the loss of nuances in the original text. Ancient Greek, the language in which the Gospels were written, often has multiple meanings for the same word, which may have contributed to confusion in later interpretations. This passage also highlights the tension between divine love and human love. While Jesus teaches that God must occupy the central place in our lives, he is not rejecting human relationships but asking that they not become obstacles to devotion to God. This idea is reinforced in other passages, where Jesus shows compassion for family bonds, such as when he heals Peter's mother-in-law or raises a widow's son. The teaching to hate can be seen as a radical call to reflect on our spiritual priorities. It challenges us to evaluate how far we are willing to go to leave our comfort zones in the name of genuine faith. Interpreting this passage requires not only study but also introspection, as it ultimately speaks more about total surrender to God than about literal ruptures with those we love. The Bible's darker passages are not easy to comprehend, but perhaps that is part of their intention. They challenge us to look beyond the words, seek deeper meanings, and question our own faith and morality. These stories, as disturbing as they may be, remind us that the Bible is not just a book of comfort but also a reflection of life's complexity and the human condition. Use the comments to share your insights, and don't forget to like and subscribe to help spread the truth. And remember, the quest for spiritual truth is infinite, and we continue to walk this path together. Until next time. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this message touched your soul. But there's still more to uncover. Click on the next videos to continue this spiritual journey. Share your thoughts in the comments, like to support this mission, and subscribe so you don't miss the teachings and revelations yet to come. But remember, once you seek the truth, you'll never see the world the same way again.